Firstly, can I thank the Deputy Chief Constable Kieran Irvine and members of his senior leadership team for joining me today to participate in this public accountability meeting. The meeting is one of the mechanisms I use to hold the Chief to account on behalf of the public across County Durham and Darlington. The focus of this meeting will be around the police power to stop and search people within our communities. Stop and search is an important power used by our police force with the aim of keeping our communities safe. Over recent years, this tactic has come under significant public scrutiny over inappropriate use. Therefore, it's extremely important that the public see a legitimate and proper use of the stop and search tactic. Nationally, this has been a huge area of focus, particularly with the ever-increasing influence of social media and associated examination of individual police officers in the virtual space. The force, alongside my office, has worked hard to improve legitimacy around stop and search, making sure there are reasons for using the power. There are now 2 external community scrutiny panels focused on stop and search, and 1 internal scrutiny panel, of which my office sits. Additionally, work has also been undertaken to ensure police officers are recording their use of stop and search to the required standard in Durham. I'm keen to work with the force to ensure to enable them to showcase the already innovative practices established in Durham and to look to continually improve and go the extra mile in legitimacy and transparency of stop and search. A full recording of this meeting, including all questions and answers, will be uploaded on YouTube after the meeting and will be made available to the public. The recorded meetings will enable residents to see how the accountability process works and the role the PCC plays in delivering an efficient and effective police service by scrutinising the performance of the force and ensuring it is responsive to the needs of residents of County Durham and Darlington. I trust that this new progressive approach will enable me to give the residents the opportunity to raise what matters most to them, so I can hold the Chief Constable to account on their behalf and make County Durham and Darlington safer, stronger and more resilient to crime, drugs and antisocial behaviour. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who submitted questions around this subject. For all of those who provided a name and address with your question, I will ensure that my office provides you with a personal response on my behalf. It will be useful for me to talk through the format and who is in attendance today at the accountability meeting. In a few minutes, I will invite Deputy Chief Constable Kieran Irvine to say a few words and provide some operational context and background information around this subject. There then will be around about half an hour presentation delivered by CI Chief Inspector Stephanie Bird from the Strategic Capabilities and Operational Resilience Department. Following this presentation, I will read out a selection of questions and will direct them to the Chief Constable and Deputy Chief Constable and his team to provide responses. It was noted that some of the questions received by my office had similar themes, so these have been grouped together, paraphrased, and hopefully will answer most common concerns and queries. I do hope that members of the public will find the content of the presentation useful to assist them in having a better understanding about how I will continue to hold the force to account to address local policing issues and to ensure Durham Constabulary is efficient and effective police force. I will now hand over to Deputy Chief Constable Kieran Irvine to say a few words. Thank you.
Good morning, Joey. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about stop and search. With me in the room at police headquarters, I've got ACC Tonya Antonis and Chief Inspector Steph Bird from the force, and also Sheena Owen is online from our Governance and Insights team, and Gary Ridley, who straddles both organisations as Chief Finance Officer and Assistant Chief Officer for the force online. I'm conscious there's other members of your team who are on with us this morning. First of all, if I can thank Steph and her team for not only putting together the presentation for this morning, but also for the leadership that she's shown over the last couple of years or so in relation to stop and search. The legislation behind stop and search is around about 40 years old now, and was brought in following the Brixton riots, and we can all perhaps remember back a time, certainly for those of us who've got some vintage behind us, of the issues that were faced in London in and around that time. And it's strangely coincidental that some 40 years later we're talking about many of the same things. Now, of course, the legislation of itself is, as I've said, around 40 years old, but it's been subject of a lot of tweak and change and additional guidance over the years to try and bring out the importance of the legitimacy of the police in its actions and interactions with our communities. It remains an emotive area for lots of reasons, and most particularly in recent times in respect of disproportionate treatment of certain parts of of our communities across the country. I know within the presentation we'll talk a little bit about that, and I anticipate some of the questions will also discuss that as well when we move a bit later on. What I will say, however, is that when used well and when used properly, both in accordance with the legislation and the current guidance, stop and search is a highly effective tool, both in terms of our ability to gather intelligence and understanding of what is going on in our communities in relation to crime, disorder and antisocial behaviour, but also as part of our wider patrol and crime reduction strategies, as part of the whole process of what we would call tasking and coordination within policing, to ensure that criminals are and remain on the back foot. It is important that a criminal, if they're prowling the streets of Durham and Darlington at 3 o'clock in the morning, have an element of fear that the police could be round the corner and the police will take all the necessary steps to prevent them from committing crime. Of course, that doesn't always work out perfectly in all parts of the country, and there are scenarios and instances that we've seen reported right the way across the media of inappropriate use of the powers, inappropriate use of the tactic, and also significant issues that have been reported, not only in relation to disproportionality around race and ethnicity, but also disproportionality and what might be perceived as inappropriate use of the tactic and the powers in relation to young people. As you've already mentioned in the introduction, we have submitted to extensive scrutiny, both with the public and through your office, which we think is a welcome means of us improving our performance in this area. And at this point, if you're content, I'll hand over to Steph to take us through a 20-minute or so presentation in relation to our use of the tactic in the force.
Thanks, Kieran.
Morning everyone, I'm Steph Bird, Chief Inspector in Squad here in Durham Constabulary, and I have the force lead for stop and search. Just wait for Ashley to share the screen. Thanks Ashley, I'll just let you know when I want you to move on with the slides. So this presentation, as already alluded to, is around public accountability in relation to stop and search, and I'm just going to explain what we do in force in relation to how we ensure we are legitimate in our use of that particular power. So we'll start with a look at what is stop and search. So this is a widely discussed police power, particularly in the mainstream media, and it becomes more topical when serious violence or major incidents associated with public order and public safety occur. And improper use can cause a loss of confidence. But correct use can be instrumental in assisting our timely response to all kinds of community problems, from tackling antisocial behaviour to tackling those committing the more serious offences, and subsequently resulting in improved confidence. The power is not widely understood by communities, and often stories in the media portray force-specific issues as UK-wide issues. Ashley, can you just move the slide forward, sorry? Thank you. So the power is not widely understood by communities, and often stories in the media portray force-specific issues as UK-wide issues. Challenges around stop and searches differ greatly from force to force, and issues seen by bigger metropolitan forces and forces whose populations are more diverse are not replicated in Durham. So stop and search provides police with the power to search a person or a vehicle. There must be reasonable grounds present. A search can be for drugs, a weapon, stolen property, or items used in crime. It's a vital tool for tackling high harm offending, and it also directly links to confidence. Next slide, please. It's also something that's referred to as searches without reasonable suspicion. These are commonly referred to as Section 60 searches. And in order for police to use these, we must believe that serious violence may occur. The authority should be really at the highest level, certainly at ACC. There's only been one authorised in Durham in the last 6 years, and I think that shows how seriously we take the issue of these search powers. There are concerns nationally that this power is abused in some police areas and that this power unfairly targets ethnic minorities, with some forces reducing the threshold for authorisation to superintendent. Nationally, very low numbers lead to arrest, and that figure's around about 4%. But more Section 60 searches are carried out by the Metropolitan Police. The one and only Section 60 authorised in Durham was during a serious violence event and still only resulted in one of these searches being carried out on a white male. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to have a look at what good looks like. So we can't stop based on how a person looks. So we can't stop them on their appearance or their previous record. There is really strict established guidance and expectations placed upon the police around stop and search. And some of this incorporates a mnemonic called Go Wisely. So Go Wisely stands for grounds. So we'll have to tell someone what we're looking for, and the object that we're looking for. The law, in terms of what law we're applying to carry out that search. We have to show them our warrant card if we're not in uniform, in order to ensure that they can understand our identity and to prove that we are in fact a police officer. We have to tell them what station we work at. We have to tell them they're entitled to a copy of the record. The legality of the search has to be clearly explained. And we have to tell them that you are detained for the purposes of the search. And we must have robust governance in place and be legitimate and transparent, because we're rightly held to account through the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, HMIC, FRS, who are the inspection teams that come in and hold us to account in relation to how we deliver policing, and most importantly, the public. So that governance has to be in place to ensure that both the public and us can be confident that we're applying police powers legitimately. And some of the things that we use for that are the body-worn video policy, recording methods, internal and external scrutiny, and these all enable us to be transparent in the governance and public accountability process. Next slide, please. So next we're going to have a look at how we understand what our performance looks like, and in the next slides I'll take you through our recording and reviewing, internal scrutiny, external scrutiny, and how we look at feedback learning and continuous improvement. Next slide, please. So in terms of recording and reviewing, when our officers carry out a stop search, a record has to be created, and that's added to our records management system, and we call that Sigma. The data required to go onto that record is in line with Go Wisely, and that ensures that we're collecting the correct data. We can then supply that data into national data through the Home Office. We also record the demographics of the person searched, and here in Durham we make sure that that record gets reviewed within 28 days by a sergeant. Next slide, please. So in terms of internal scrutiny, we've recently expanded and reviewed our internal scrutiny processes. So it now looks like this. So we have a panel of inspectors who meet bi-monthly. It's chaired by myself as the force lead. It applies a standardised test, and throughout this internal scrutiny, we're looking for identifying good practice and areas for improvement, and we share the results with the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, and we do actually invite the legitimacy lead to come and observe the panel if they're available and they think it would be useful to do so. So the panel's made up of inspectors from local policing and the roads and armed policing unit, and that's because these are the business areas carrying out over 90% of our stop and search activity. As I've said, it's chaired by me, and if I'm not around, then my deputy will do it. So the test against is a question set based against Go Wisely, and it's very similar to what we use in our external scrutiny. But we also incorporate scrutiny of the overall interaction, because we understand how important it is to understand how we communicate, what our communication style is like, and the key policy requirements associated with stop and search, such as body-worn video, to ensure that those are actually being adhered to. And it's all about the opportunity for continuous improvement and to enable me as the chair to identify learning needs, and in some cases red flags where we're not getting it right. And then these can be addressed quickly, either collectively by the leaders sitting on the panel for more localised learning, or via myself into my department for organisational learning. And I work really closely with the legitimacy officer from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner to ensure that we can aid understanding of performance and legitimacy. Next slide, please. So to complement that internal scrutiny, recently we've carried out an internal audit. So that included 100 randomly selected records. They were assessed by chief inspectors across the force from all business areas. So we didn't have chief inspectors checking their own staff. We had a 96% compliance rate, and by that I mean in terms of legitimacy around the search. So we had used the power legitimately, it was 96%. 87% had full body-worn video of the whole interaction, not just the Go Wisely part. 37% had positive action taken, and 79% had a supervisory review completed within 28 days. We're looking to conduct this internal audit annually as part of our ongoing performance framework around stop and search. Next slide, please. So now we'll have a look at external scrutiny and what that looks like. So our BUS panel is chaired by an independent member of the public and facilitated by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. When I say BUS, I mean black and ethnic minority, use of force and stop search. So that's specifically focusing on our legitimacy and that disproportionality to ensure that we are legitimate in that space. We also have a youth scrutiny panel. We obviously inspected by His Majesty's Corporate Inspector for Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service. And we have publication of quarterly data on our force website, which also links into police.uk, so anyone can access that data. So the BUS panel provides members of our communities the opportunity to review and assess our performance in real life stop and search police activity. We provide them with access to all of the material produced from the activity, including the records created and the body-worn video. They use an approved question set to rate the quality and legitimacy of each instance of police stop and search activity against Go Wisely, but also communication, politeness, sensitivity and use of body-worn video. The youth scrutiny panel is relatively new, but it's already had very positive impact. It works in the same way as the BUS panel, but it's made up exclusively of young people who are under 18 and they're from our local communities. Searches of young people were subject to much national focus and debate throughout last year, and I was keen to ensure we could apply the same scrutiny to searches of young people in particular as we do to other specific groups within the community. So HMIC FRS audit all forces, and part of their audit focuses on stop and search. And last year they came into Durham to visit us as part of a national super complaint linked to stop and search, and they reviewed our stop and search practices as a result of that, and the feedback was very positive from them in terms of the work we're doing. Every quarter we provide the Home Office with our stop and search data, and this is accessible via police.uk, and we publish that infographic that I've already mentioned on our public website, and that enables the public to have a look at our performance around stop and search anytime they wish to do so. Next slide, please. In terms of feedback learning and continuous improvement, these are some of the things that we've looked at and really focused on making better over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, particularly the body-worn video policy. So that policy enforced being updated to include that it must be used throughout the entire interaction of stop and search, and that's reiterated in training around stop and search, both when people first join the force, but also when we do our refresher training for officer safety training. We've addressed some issues in relation to people using handcuffs for stop and search when they're perhaps as questionable about the legitimacy of that use of force. We've provided all of our staff with communication and de-escalation training over the last 12 months. Everyone that's in a front-facing role and everyone that's been through officer safety training has had that input. And there is a stop and search scenario embedded into our new officer safety training programme. And working with the child exploitation team and the safeguard superintendent, I've introduced a pilot to monitor and assess how, when and why we search people under 18. And this provides us with crucial safeguarding and intelligence opportunities and enables additional accountability and intervention for child-centred policing. And we plan to deliver this to the external panels in the coming months to update them about the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So we're going to move on now and have a look at what our actual stop and search activity looks like in County Durham and Darlington. So there's some figures on the screen there, as you can see. 2,080 searches carried out in the period that we're looking at for this this accountability meeting, so August 22 to January 23. Just over 30% had action taken. 67.88% had no further action taken. 46.92% had an outcome linked to the purpose of the search. And 11.63% of our police action was community resolution. So in relation to no further action, which I'll refer to as NFA, our NFA rate is lower than our neighbouring forces. And our neighbouring forces have NFA rates in excess of 75%. So I think that's a real positive for us in terms of our stop and search activity. And our community resolution rate is around 10% higher than our neighbouring forces. And this is a really good indication that the police in Durham Constabulary are not using stop and search activity to criminalise people. Where we can find a different resolution, we will use that. Next slide, please. So this graph provides visual representation of the volume of our activity. And you can see the grey boxes represent no further action and the blue boxes represent police action taken. And you can see across the time frame there, these are relatively static, but there is a peak in November around activity, and that coincides with our forced response to neighbourhood crime, and that's Operation Trident. But what's interesting here is that even when the activity peaks, the no further action and the police action taken remains remarkably similar. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just a different graph showing you, pie chart showing the police action taken and what action we actually take. So as alluded to on the previous slide, no further action is by far and away the most likely outcome of a stop and search. Arrest is then the next most likely. But community resolution is really high at 11.63%. The rest are then made up of summons, cautions, and then we're getting really low numbers of penalty notice for disorder, and even smaller numbers for warnings for cannabis or CAT. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to having a look at demographics. So this is these figures are from the census data, the most recent census data, and that shows our white population numbers at 607,196. And white people are subject of 93.5% of our stop and search activity. Our black population numbers 2,441. These are resident in the County Durham and Darlington. It doesn't include, obviously, we have a huge transient population because of our tourism and the university. So in the last 12 months, we searched 19 black people, and that accounts for 0.8% of all of our stop and search activity. So if we think about that 19 black people we searched, that works out at 7.8 per 1,000 head of population. These are really small numbers. And if we think about it, an additional 5 would take the rate to nearly 10 per 1,000 head of population, which appears to be a massive increase, but the numbers still remain really small. Whereas if we put the same increase onto white people, the rate wouldn't change at all. So it's important to contextualise the data when we're dealing with really small numbers. Next slide, please. So analysis into disproportionality in stop and search has been carried out, and this didn't highlight any areas of concern in terms of people who are not white being unfairly subject to stop and search activity. As previously outlined, the numbers of people we search who are not white are very small. We monitor this closely for our governance and scrutiny processes for both stop and search and use of force, because whilst they're not synonymous, they are closely linked, to ensure we're applying our powers in a legitimate way. Next slide, please. So we're looking at age here in terms of demographic. People under 18 are subject to around 15% of our stop and search activity. And the figures you can see there from 2,080 searches, 348 were under 18, 641 were 18 to 24, so that's the largest age group that we search. 479 were 25 to 34 and 522 were over 34. So persons subject to stop and search are not legally required to provide people with the personal details, and some choose not to tell us. So in the remainder of the searches, the person's age hasn't been supplied, and that was about 90. So on to when does stop and search activity take place? So you can see from the graph there that there's a really clear increase after 9 p.m. with a peak between midnight and 3 a.m. And the activity rises and stop and search generally follows our calls for service demand, with 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. being the quietest period, and a steady increase throughout the late part of the day. And I have checked, and this is pretty much in line with national data. So other forces see the same sort of time scale for peak activity around stop and search. Next slide. So what do we actually search for? Well, this pie chart shows the most common items that we search for. So that's drugs, with 943 searches, which is just over 45%. Next is articles used for theft, which is 443 searches, which is just over 21%. Then we're into offensive weapons, which is 72 searches, and that's 17.88%. Then we're moving into stolen goods, articles for use in criminal damage, game or poaching equipment, goods on which duty has not been paid, so things like cigarettes, alcohol, and then really low numbers for fireworks, because that's like very seasonal, and then firearms. Next slide. So just to summarise, I think from the presentation there, I've been able to give you a quick overview of our organisational governance and scrutiny processes, to assure you that we're dedicated to continuous learning and development in relation to our use of stop and search, that we have good performance both regionally and nationally, and that we continue to work hard to ensure we're legitimate. And then I think we move on to the questions.
Joy, you're on mute.
Thanks very much for that very comprehensive presentation, Stephanie. Really, takes us through some of the detail that I'm sure that members of the public will be very satisfied with our approach. So I'm now going to ask some of the public's questions. So first question is, what do the force do with third-party reports, that's verbal and video, submitted where members of the public have raised perceived issue with the grounds of quality of a stop and search they have witnessed?
Good morning. Tonya Antonis, Assistant Chief Constable. I'll take some of the questions today. So in terms of issues raised, they will be dealt with by the force in the same way that any complaint or dissatisfaction is raised with us. So if a member of public has a concern, wishes to raise any dissatisfaction with us, we would say that we would ask them to come through the force website, through the complaints process there, or lodge a formal complaint if they feel necessary, or they can go to one of the stations and speak to someone about their concerns. But in terms of what we do, we treat it in the same way that we would any dissatisfaction that's raised, and we would investigate, we would look into it, and consider it in isolation, and look at and take that forward. So we would deal with it in the same way we would any complaint.
Thanks, Tonya. Next question. Do members of the public have to give their name and address when they are stopped and searched?
Joy, I'll pick that one up if I may, and simply put, the answer is no. Members of the public don't need to give their information to the police officer who is conducting the stop and search. Now, of course, with through effective communications and a proper sympathetic explanation of why someone is being stopped, and building a rapport with the individual, we would hope to gather the information of the individual that we stop, because that will help us ideally eliminate them from inquiries if they haven't done anything wrong in the first instance. But also it means that when it comes to scrutiny down the line of our activity, we can demonstrate absolute transparency, and the individual can either have a copy of the record in accordance with the legislation, or of course we can do that broader scrutiny which we have talked about as part of the presentation. Now, of course, as well, if we do search somebody and they don't provide their information and we do find something on them, then it becomes impossible really for us to do anything other than arrest them. So we wouldn't be able to deal with anything that we find through warning or community resolution, or indeed seek to interview an individual later at a time that's more convenient. So, in an ideal world for us, of course, we'd like people to provide us with their names, date of birth, ethnicity and address, so that we can undertake the necessary inquiries, whether that individual is eliminated from suspicion by virtue of the search or otherwise brought under further requirements from us.
Thanks, Kieran. I think that's always useful to know. I think particularly in these heightened times of the press coverage as well, it's understanding, these are some really good questions that the public have asked. So thank you very much for your response on that one. The next one obviously relates to driving. So if a member of the public was driving a vehicle, can they be randomly stop checked by a police officer?
Yes, they can. Another short answer, yes, they can. I think the important piece to pick out here is that the activity of stopping a vehicle on the road isn't a stop search. It's actually a vehicle stop. So just to make the difference there. And we have powers under the Road Traffic Act that if you're driving on a road, a police officer can stop your car for a whole host of reasons, but importantly to check that you're on the road legally, that your car is taxed, you have insurance, MOT, that the car is roadworthy. So those physical checks. Now, if the officer wanted to search you or your vehicle, they would need reasonable grounds to do that. So if following the stop, they wanted to go that bit further and search you or search the vehicle, they would have to have grounds and explain what, as has already been said earlier, around the grounds for that. So it could be that there's intelligence to suggest that the person driving that vehicle is carrying drugs and they're running drugs, and that would give us the grounds to search the vehicle and search the person. But we would have to have reasonable grounds to do that.
Thanks, Tonya. Next question is, what is the find rate? This is when an officer has found any prohibited item, even if it was not the initial object of the search in Durham, between August and December 2022. And how does this compare nationally?
Thanks, Joy. Back to me. Our rate for that time period is 22.4%, which in my view is positive. Although there aren't widely available national statistics in relation to fine rates for other forces. What I can say is that from my experience of working in other forces, a fine rate of anything over 15% is a positive position. And for us to be where we are, I think demonstrates the effectiveness of our tasking mechanisms to ensure that our officers are by and large in the right place at the right time in order to capture people who are doing things that they ought necessarily to be doing. It's important as well to recognise here is that the fine rate is only sort of part of the story, insofar as there are occasions when we conduct searches which might not necessarily result in an item being recovered, but we would still see it as a positive because we might have been able to put in place a safeguarding intervention, you know, particularly when we talk about young people involved in antisocial behaviour. We may stop search a group of young people in a park, or for instance, and that might not result in a criminal outcome, but what it might do is enable us to engage with them, explain, and then engage further with their parents and sort of negate some of that antisocial activity. So there are other positives that come out of this, and in addition to that, we do often come across people who we search because they're acting suspiciously, who we might not find anything on that occasion, but they're already wanted for other crimes or missing from home or similar, and in which case that might bring about an arrest or a further safeguarding intervention. And these types of results aren't included in the data around fines, but do in our view would come across as being positive outcomes of the particular intervention.
Thanks, Kieran. I think that's a really good question sent in by a member of the public as well, because what you said there is understanding some of that data and how we compare nationally from our performance as well. But it is quite a technical one, but it's a really good response, so we know what we do and the impact that we have when we do these stop and searches. What should members of the public do if they think an officer has given insufficient grounds to search them?
I think Steph covered it very well in the presentation around the go wisely. So the officer should give the grounds, the object of what they're looking for, identify themselves, the station they're at, give the legalities, explain that you're entitled to a copy of the record, and must explain that they're being detained for the purposes of a search. Now, if you're not satisfied that that's been explained properly, you can ask the officer to signpost you to the legislation around it. And I'm really confident that all our officers have really good training, and that's the basis of when they're speaking to somebody and engaging with them, that they will go through that Go Wisely acronym. But if you're not satisfied and it hasn't been explained properly, you can, of course, make a complaint regarding that. The one thing I would say is it would be really helpful, picking up on the point that was made earlier around, do they have to give details? If you provide your details, if you've made a complaint and you've provided your details, it's much easier for us to track the record of the search so that we can deal properly with the complaint. If you haven't given your details, it's really difficult for us to track back. We can still do it, but it takes a lot longer to do it. So if you're not happy, of course you can make that complaint, but it's really helpful if you've given your details so we can track back. But I just say to anybody, just think, go wisely, and just make sure the officer's given you those details.
Thanks, Tanya. I think that's really helpful, and I think explains the importance, if you can give that information, and how it can help later on down the line. I think we probably put the details of that on the YouTube link as well, of how you contact the force. I think this is a really, poignant one, given recent events. Somebody's, has wrote in from their question is, what are the rules of an off-duty, non-uniformed officers asking to search members of the public?
Joy, I'll pick this one up if I may. I think the first thing to remember from our perspective, and try and perhaps reflect to the public, is that as police officers, or rather as constables, we're effectively never off duty. There's a duty and requirement upon us to act if we see criminal activity and intervene in an appropriate way, regardless of whether we're at work or not at work. So the duty piece is often a bit of a red herring, really. It's sometimes we're at work, sometimes we're not at work, but we're realistically always on duty. So I think that's an important thing to say, to reassure members of the community. And we can probably all count over the course of our careers numerous occasions where we've effectively put ourselves back on duty in order to intervene in the face of crime or significant antisocial behaviour that's happened in front of us, or indeed road traffic collisions and similar. These things happen all the time. The important thing I would say is that despite that, it's highly unlikely that you will be stop searched by an officer who is off duty. It's something that wouldn't ordinarily happen. So I'm going to focus on the non-uniform piece if I can. The vast majority of the time, our non-uniformed officers, and for that I mean detectives, are often on duty in pairs, so they're often together with another officer. They are allowed to conduct stop search, but the legal difference, as Steph's described in the main presentation, is that when you stop somebody for the purposes of a stop search and you're not in uniform, then you must produce your warrant card in order to be able to reassure the individual that you are a police officer and able to undertake the search legally. Now, you've already mentioned some of those recent the recent cases, and we're all deeply ashamed of the way in which Wayne Couzens behaved and used his status as a constable in undertaking the terrible murder of Sarah Everard. So what I would say in those circumstances, and we have briefed this to officers within the force, is that if you do stop somebody when you're not in uniform, either off duty or you're in a detective role, is that you provide the explanation to the member of the public and you allow them the opportunity to ring the force control room. So that might be offering them your radio set or your force mobile phone, or indeed saying to them, ring 101 and we'll wait whilst you undertake that call. And then they can provide the details of the officer in terms of their warrant number and a description if needs be. Fortunately, as a small force, most of our officers are known to each other. So what we would ask the officer then to do is just be patient with the member of the public and allow them to conduct any inquiries they need to reassure themselves that the officers acted legitimately in the circumstance. We could never say that a single crewed officer, either off duty or on duty but in plain clothes, wouldn't conduct a search, because using a pretty sort of strident example, they could be walking along and seeing somebody carrying television out of the back of a house. Well, of course, we would expect the officer to act in those circumstances, but we would expect them to be sensible, sensitive, provide an appropriate explanation, and allow the member of the public to check and ratify the officer's details.
Thanks, Kieran. I think that's really, really sort of reassuring from the members of the public that they have that option as well. So getting that information out to them, I think if it was there, that there's got the option where they can ring into the control room and get that reassurance, just to inform them that it is a legitimate stop search. Thank you. How are officers supposed to de-escalate the situation in the run-up to or during a stop and search?
And that really follows what we've just heard from the deputy in terms of our communication skills, being sensitive and using empathy, and really engaging with the person that we're looking to stop search. I've already spoken about the communication around the Go Wisely, and just taking time to really explain that properly and reassure the person that we're speaking with. So our officers get a lot of training around this, a lot of training around communication, and this really comes to the fore when you're looking to stop and search somebody. So we're always very empathetic about the impact that has on somebody when you stop them and search them. So it really does all come down to communication, explaining our powers, but being really sensitive and listening to their views as to how it's making them feel, and any issues or concerns that they may have. So really dealing sensitively with that.
Thanks, Tonya. One relating to body worn video. Does an officer have to tell members of the public they are recording on body worn video when they undertake a stop and search?
Okay, Joy, that's back with me. And again, sort of simplistically put, no, they don't have to tell the member of the public, but it is our policy position that when officers undertake stop and search, that they do activate the body worn video. And the body worn video is a very obvious piece of equipment that is on the chest of the officer, attached to their stab resistant vest. It's hard to miss against the black vest because it's bright yellow. And when it's activated, it makes a noise, and then also a red light comes on to indicate it's recording, much like if you had a home camcorder back in the olden days. So it's clearly obvious that it is a camera, and it will be obvious, should be obvious to the member of the public that it is recorded. And the reason why we ask in policy that officers record all stop and search is that one, it protects the member of the public, protects the integrity of the activity we're doing, and also, you know, and this is in no small measure, it protects the officer. On many occasions where members of the public would record dissatisfaction or complaint in relation to the use of stop search, our first action is to go and check the body worn video to make sure that it's been done properly and in accordance with rules, and often then we can provide an explanation. Sometimes that comes through your office in terms of service recovery, and then we can then explain to the member of the public that the officers acted in accordance with the rules, and then deal with any fallout that comes from that. Plus, as well, it gives us the opportunity proactively to check stop search for the quality of the activity, as Steph's described as part of the main presentation, in terms of our proactive audit and wider scrutiny. With the new technology available to us, we've streamlined the way in which that body worn footage can be attached to the stop search record. So it's very easy for us to be able to draw that information out quickly and provide reassurance to the public. Inevitably, there may be sensitivities on occasion, and if that's as a consequence of either a protected characteristic of the individual who's subject to the stop and search, or indeed a preference observed by the member of the public, then we'll do our best to explain, and we would also always consider turning off the body worn video if that was the wish of the member of the public. But we would record that as part of the stop and search methodology so that the officer and the transparency of what we've done is protected.
Thanks, Kieran. I think it's useful when you do have any issues that we've talked about. If people did have concerns, that you have got that information to hand when you review the cases as well. So it's about for the member of the public, but also for our officers undertaking the stop and search. How many of the searches for drugs between August and December 2022 were given no further action?
I'll pick this one up, and you will have seen from the presentation that Steph did that searches for drugs are our most common searches. They make up the bulk of the searches we undertake. They're related to drugs. And between that period of August and December 2022, we carried out 715 searches connected to drugs. Now, of that, 64% of those, no further action was taken. So that was 464. So 464 out of that 715 resulted in no further action taken. But drugs certainly is our biggest area for stop searches.
Thanks, Tonya. And the final question is, does the force think that they are currently stopping and searching members of the Black British community disproportionately?
And Joy, I'll take this last one. I think that, again, the simple answer for us is at this moment in time, we don't believe that we are. We're confident that we're proportionate in our use of stop and search. However, I make 2 points within that. Firstly, it's important that we don't rest on our laurels, and we've recently done some research work on this subject, and then had that refreshed. And as outlined in the main presentation, the numbers of non-white, whilst the numbers of non-white people living in County Durham and Darlington remain very small in terms of our overall population, the fact that we've searched fewer than 20 black people in a year, I think, points to us having confidence that we don't act disproportionately towards underrepresented groups. We keep a real close eye onto this, and almost on a one-to-one basis, we'll check any searches of people from underrepresented groups just to make sure that there's nothing untoward or nothing that we need to be concerned about in terms of emerging issues of disproportionality. With the small population size overall, though, and even in the most recent census, it's still extremely small. Those figures on a month-to-month basis can look a bit lumpy. You know, if we were to search two or three people from underrepresented communities in a particular month, that would be a significant change. But then it may be a number of months before we do any more searches of people from those communities. So we look at this over a slightly longer period to try and iron out any of those lumps and bumps which come as a consequence of the small size of the population sample within the totality of those people who live in Durham and Darlington.
Thanks, Kieran. So I think that brings me to the end of this accountability session. I do hope that the presentation delivered and the questions that have followed have been useful, and members of the public will find the responses and also the presentation very insightful to the stop and search procedures within County Durham and Darlington. I'm confident with the work that we undertake with scrutiny that Durham's use of the stop and search is proportionate, legitimate and reasonable. But I'm keen to ensure to continue that the police powers are scrutinised by the public and that the scrutiny is used to inform organisational learning within the force. I think it's also important to note that what is true for use of police powers in one force is not the case in others. The police and landscape and demographics of Durham is very different to that of other forces, which ultimately presents different policing challenges. As your elected Police and Crime Commissioner, it's essential that the public confidence in your police service is built, maintained, and most importantly, justified. I see this as a continually developing space in which we can work on behalf of the public to ensure the stop and search is appropriately scrutinised to carry out the benefit of the public and their safety. To conclude, I would like to thank the Deputy Chief Constable and his team for their participation in this public accountability meeting. Thank you.